Join the conversation in Tipperary. Contact us through Facebook, Twitter, or email tiptoday@tippfm.com.
Now it's time to have a look at what's happening globally, and glad to be joined as usual by Thomas Conway of the Nina Guardian. Good morning to you, Thomas.
Good morning, Fran.
Good to see you today. Well, we have a look at what's happening in Iran, and again, it's rather worrying there. I think, is it up to about 500 people dead?
It's 500, but that is almost certainly an underestimate. I mean, we don't know the true scale or the true degree of the protest there, largely because the Iranian regime have imposed an internet blackout, which has cut off all communications, not just with the outside world, but internally within Iran. But certainly the number quoted by human rights agencies is in excess of 500 now, and that is likely to rise, and it is likely an underestimate.
These protests, every few years they sort of emerge in Iran. What's different about this one?
They seem to crop up. A couple of years ago, people will remember the Masa Amini protests in response to the death of a young woman in custody. This time it was the Iranian economy is essentially in the doldrums. The rial, the currency, had effectively collapsed. Shop owners were hoarding goods. I think there was genuine deprivation from the reports I've seen within the country. It led to a protest, first among shopkeepers. It then spread and spiralled, and it's turned into a kind of a mass set of demonstrations against the Iranian theocratic regime, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the senior clerics in the regime. The question is, will it be large enough to topple the regime? I mean, that would be a monumental moment. It's been in place since the revolution in 1979. And then there is a question as to what might succeed it. So if we are looking at regime change, the demonstrations are currently leaderless. That is one thing to note. The protests, they're not being led by a senior figurehead as such, and I think that's significant, because often you need somebody. We saw with Syria, you had al-Shara, who led kind of the movement and eventually became leader. That doesn't seem to be the case in Iran, at least not that I understand.
What about the Shah's grandson? Is that?
Yeah, Reza Pahlavi. He's currently ensconced in Washington. The Shah was essentially, the Shah is the Persian word for monarch.
Yes.
He was the monarch of Iran, reigned from the Shah dynasty, or the Pahlavi dynasty reigned from the 1920s up to the revolution in 1979. Reza Pahlavi is the son of the last Shah, and he has kind of signalled in recent days that he would be up for leading a movement. Now, I think there is some appetite within the country. I think all he would be is an interim leader. I mean, it would effectively be
as they move to a democratic process.
I suppose that would be the plan. He would have American backing. I think he is set to meet with President Trump this week. I know President Trump has a meeting with senior White House advisors tomorrow in relation to maybe launching a strike. And that would be very interesting. The interesting thing to see here, to observe, will be how America acts. I mean, it has a number of different options. President Trump says he's been briefed on the options by his national security team. They range to everything from a full-out military strike to maybe some kind of cyber attack in which the Americans restore the internet to the Iranian citizens. Now, I would imagine that would be quite complex, but it might give us a picture of the true scale of what is happening inside.
Yeah, it's a strange one. My understanding is Iran wouldn't exactly have friends anywhere, really, except maybe, is there a Russian influence there?
Yeah, I think they trade. I think there is an economic relationship between Iran and Russia. China would have maybe tacitly supported Iran in the past, but for years it has been known as a rogue state, both within the Middle East and globally.
Israel being the arch enemy.
Israel is the arch enemy, but I mean, relations with other countries in the Middle East are not good either. Saudi Arabia, there is a rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran obviously sponsors proxies, i.e. Hezbollah and Hamas in different parts of the Middle East. and they have been significantly weakened by Israel. And of course, the regime itself in Iran was weakened by those strikes last year, those joint American-Israeli strikes. So you're right to say Iran has very few friends, and you can see the chorus, the international chorus of leaders coming out and condemning the repression of protesters. A lot of them, I think, very clearly enough signalling that regime change would be no harm, or regime change might be in Iran's interests.
I'm just thinking, I mean, if Donald Trump does take on this, I mean, he's taking on so much stuff on so many different fronts,
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. And you could argue, I mean, where does this fit with the America First, the MAGA agenda?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing swiping Maduro from Venezuela. That's in his own backyard. But the Middle East is not a theatre that the US has enjoyed over the past few decades, and there's the threat of getting into forever wars, and there's the threat of what might happen if the regime did fall. But I kind of feel, I have an instinct here that Trump will launch some sort of strike. I think he will find it irresistible, and there are a lot of senior Republican warhawks in Congress with a lot of antipathy or resentment for Iran. I mean, Lindsey Graham, the Alabama senator, came out with a statement yesterday, or a post on X, saying as much. So I think he will find it very, very tempting, and it is a tempting choice that's before him. It could happen in the next 24 hours. You just do not know.
It's frightening stuff, isn't it? You mentioned Israel. Let's talk about Benjamin Netanyahu, because, of course, he will lead his party into a general election. Is it the 12th?
Yeah, it is. He spent over 18 years in office. This will be the 12th time this year. He could become the longest-serving leader of any democracy in since the Second World War. So that just outlines how long Netanyahu has been around. He's 76, and the reason I put this in was on Friday he did an interview, and he doesn't do many interviews with the international press. He did an interview with The Economist. Now, he didn't give away much, but he was a little bit more restrained than the usual Netanyahu that we've grown accustomed to over the past years. Now, obviously, he derided, the international media, dismissed concerns over Israeli actions in Gaza, and said Israel had to strike, and so on and so forth. But he was rather muted when he was asked about Iran and America. He said Israel would strike back if there was a direct strike on the country from Iran. And going back, that is a consideration that Donald Trump will have to ponder over. If he does strike, if America does strike, Iran may not strike America back directly. They may go for Israel, their senior ally, instead. So that is a consideration.
And that's what makes it all so bloody dangerous, I suppose. Where's Netanyahu in the polls along with his coalition? Where is he?
Yeah, so he currently leads. His government is touching towards the far right of the political spectrum at the moment, and that's where he stands. But he needs the support of a couple of hard right parties, essentially, to stay in power. And when the next election comes, he will rely on those parties. His main rival is a guy called Yair Lapid, who's the head of the opposition. But there has been kind of a unified, there has been criticism of Netanyahu over the past few years, but there's been a largely unified, there's been a government essentially of national unity set up to facilitate the war, because Israel was in a war mode. Now, there are serious questions there, questions that haven't been asked, particularly about October 7th and how it occurred. And
the security failure,
and to what degree Netanyahu was responsible. And I think ultimately the next election would hinge on whether people are willing to ignore that. I mean, it was probably one of the greatest catastrophes in Israeli history, that security breach.
And everybody thought that the moment there was a ceasefire, that the attention would turn to that issue. It hasn't quite.
No, it hasn't. I mean, Gaza has not been, and there was deaths of Palestinians over the past few days. I know on international news sites, but there has been sporadic outbreaks of violence since the ceasefire was announced. There still hasn't been a move to the so-called phase 2 of the plan, which would see Israel essentially withdraw from the area of the Strip it currently occupies, and an international force would be inserted in to facilitate essentially a transition. Now, Hamas on their side have not de-armed, which is not helping the situation. It's unlikely they will surrender their arms. So that situation in Gaza seems to have remained static. And that's not benefiting anybody, because I know Palestinians are living in extremely harsh conditions. We know food is not plentiful there. There was outright famine. I think the situation has improved since that time, but it's certainly... there's no quality of life there. I'm not sure has education been restarted and things like that. So a lot of people are losing out. But certainly, it's a question. I mean, Netanyahu is 76. I think if he does serve another term, it will be his last.
I thought there was one thing that was really, really telling, though, Thomas, and I'd love your view on it. I mean, when he spoke about potential Arab partners, for example, he referred to private conversations, and he said if you want the truth, he said many of them don't give a hoot. They don't care about Palestine or Palestinian issues.
They care about its effect on the street, to finish that quote. So what he's saying there, and I think that's astonishing, and that would be very disheartening for a lot of Palestinians.
Remarkable statement, yeah.
It might explain to the degree the fact that the Arab states did not step in sooner when the war in Gaza was ongoing. But what he's saying essentially is that, their populations might care, the populations of places like Saudi Arabia, but the leaders don't really. They're in it for the economic benefits of our relationship with Israel.
Even the huge amount of people who have died in this, they don't care.
Yeah, now, to what extent you can trust Netanyahu's words is obviously, people can make their own judgment, but he hasn't exactly been very fruitful in the past. But certainly, that is... it's a bit of a revelation to make, and I would take it with a large grain of salt. But
right along the way, there's been discussion around whether or not Palestine gets support or is supported by other Arab nations.
Yeah, indeed. And I suppose you had the thing called the Abraham Accords, which was essentially an economic agreement. It offered economic benefits to Arab countries for... I suppose maintaining an economic relationship with Israel, and there was talks of expanding them. But the Palestinian issue is not going away, and the prospect of a two-state solution seems to be honest, it seems more distant than ever at this point. And I think the longer Netanyahu stays in power, the more distant it will remain.
We alluded to this earlier on, but Trump's territorial ambition at this point, where are we now with that?
It's a good question. I mean, I think his attention has been diverted to Iran over the weekend, but that didn't stop him in one of his typical Trump press conferences on Friday night. I was watching it. He was greeting oil executives in the White House. He took questions for about an hour. And he said everything from, he reiterated his threat that we have to take Greenland one way or another. We have to take it. And that signals a seriousness on behalf of the US. And I think the world has woken up now after the capture of Maduro to the fact that Trump is very willing to make these moves. And he just sees no barriers. And he doesn't see the ramifications that a potential annexation of Greenland would have for NATO, for Europe, for the transatlantic alliance, which many would argue is already dead. I think, what Trump does, his general strategy is to go in hard and then roll back from there. I think what we might see unfold with Greenland, I don't think they will annex it. I think we might see an enhanced US military presence on the island, and it's the world's largest island. There's supposed to be talks between the Greenlandic governmental team, their Prime Minister Jens Frederick Nielsen, and the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio today. One key thing in that is the involvement of Denmark. To what extent the Danish government, Denmark obviously owns Greenland rather, to what extent they will be involved. Because from what I've seen, the Greenlandic government seem to kind of have been shutting out Greenland. They don't really like Greenland. They're all for their own independence, which is fair enough. But I would argue they kind of need Danish backing here.
The other NATO countries, what are they saying about this?
Well, they issued a statement last week in support, a defiant statement in support of Greenland and Greenlandic sovereignty. And I suppose there are other episodes. Macron visited a couple of months ago, and they've consistently reiterated their support. But I mean, there's no question who the superpower is here.
But is the ridiculous scenario a possibility that you would have NATO countries protecting Greenland from a NATO member?
Yeah, I think we're actually reaching that point, which is downright remarkable. And the NATO clause, Article 5 of one of NATO's foundational treaties says, an attack on one is an attack on all. But it never envisaged a situation like this where a fellow member might threaten military action on another member. So that, I mean, it's a remarkable state of affairs we've fallen into. But such is the reality of the world we're living in and what Trump has done. I mean, he has, it's a whole new ball game now, both for the EU, and it'll be interesting to see how the EU plays this one.
So these empires then that's being referred to, are we talking about America, Russia and China? Is that
realistically
this trilogy of
that's the triad. America with its kind of its sphere of influence extending from the country itself across the Americas up to perhaps Greenland in the future, in the near future, and then Russia. It's obviously eroding Ukraine, and China has sway over vast swathes of Asia. And each of the leaders, and I pointed this out on Friday, is kind of they're aging men. They each are, I think, looking at their legacy. They want to cement their legacy here. And so this is, I think, a consideration for Mr. Trump in his rhetoric when he goes about reshaping the Western Hemisphere, as he calls it. It's also a consideration for Vladimir Putin and the reason why he launched his war in Ukraine, and Xi Jinping and the prospect of military action on Taiwan. So all of them are looking to kind of make their nations
to expand.
Territorial expansion is a key tenet of kind of the ideology they're pushing here, and there are men behind them. I mean, it's not just the men themselves. Chief people in the Trump administration mentioned on Friday Stephen Miller. He's an ideologue who kind of who looks at that territorial expansion, and then you've senior people around Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping as well who would think similarly. But it's an age of empires. It's America, China, and Russia, and I think Europe's role is diminishing significantly.
It's scary stuff indeed. In other news, just before we wrap up then, that awful incident with the immigration officer who shot, what was her name?
Renee Nicole Good. Yeah, it's a shocking incident in Minneapolis. And if anyone has seen the footage, I mean, to me, she did very little wrong. Like, it certainly did not merit being shot dead, what she was doing. I mean, she might have been agitating, she might have been protesting, and that might all be true. But that doesn't mean you go and shoot someone dead. The Department of Homeland Security has cast her as a left-wing terrorist, and Trump reiterated that viewpoint at the press conference on Friday night. The White House said the viewers could draw their own conclusions, but it is a shocking situation, and there are protests across the United States, but I suppose the international agenda has kind of usurped this, or the international news has kind of usurped this in the news agenda in recent weeks. As well as that, I included in our news pieces a piece from Pope Leo XIV. War is back in vogue, he said in his State of the World address. This is an annual address akin to the State of the Union address delivered by the US President, but it was an address to his diplomatic envoys last week. The American-born pontiff expressed fear that the zeal for war was spreading and condemned the weakening of multilateralism. Now, that is a very direct critique, I think, of Donald Trump. And significantly, he made the address in English.
Yes.
And he doesn't usually speak in English. He usually goes for Italian.
So this was direct.
This was a direct rebuke of Donald Trump, from the new Pope. And considering that, many of Trump's supporters are Christians, many of them evangelicals, but there will be Catholics too, it will not have gone unnoticed by the White House, I would imagine.
What happened in Switzerland with how many people? 40 people died in the fire there.
40 people killed in the New Year's celebration. Yeah, the co-owner of the bar venue in which the inferno took place, Jacques Moretti, was arrested and held in custody after being being questioned by prosecutors on Friday morning. Switzerland held a national day of mourning. I mean, again, this has gone down the news agenda, but it was absolutely shocking to have 40 people killed, and it raises key questions. I also saw that it raises questions around governance and safety standards in Switzerland. Switzerland has a very kind of curious political system. Power is devolved out to essentially the provinces. They're called cantons, and they set their own regulations, etc., etc. So there's questions around that, and to what degree, to what role that played in the fire. I think the venue hadn't been inspected for a number of years, but it's a however it happened and whoever was responsible, and there probably were people responsible, but it's a shocking tragedy.
Absolutely dreadful indeed, and of course you can't help but hark back to our own awful tragedy
the Stardust,
all those years ago at the Stardust. What are you looking to this week? Well, I'll tell you, look into your crystal ball. Next Monday morning when you and I talk, what are we going to be talking about, do you think?
I think America will strike Iran in some way.
You really believe that?
I think they will. I think he's being briefed. I think there is... If I was, the US administration looking at this will see an irresistible opportunity to topple an ailing Iranian theocratic regime there, a regime that they've resented for decades and decades. And I think if they can do anything, regime change or revolution is best done from the inside. But if they can do anything to gently or maybe more aggressively push the protesters and aid them in their quest, I think Mr. Trump will do it, and I think he feels emboldened by what happened in Venezuela. So,
yeah, and just finally, Iran's nuclear capability would be what?
Yeah, well, the US said it was destroyed by those strikes last year. I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think they're probably
deep in the mountains there.
Yeah, building up reserves again, and I suppose that is the option that you have to weigh if they were to impose any strike. That Iran could then, when backed into a corner, lash out. But to answer your initial question, I think we'll still be speaking about America and Iran, even though in Trump's world you just never know.
You never know for sure. Thomas, pleasure.
Thanks
very much indeed. Thomas Conway of the Nina Guardian. News and information is coming up.
Tipp FM's Tipp Today.
With Slattery's Garage, puck on. It's time to change. Test drive the award-winning range of Peugeot hybrids and fully electric vehicles at Slattery's Garage today. See slatterysgarage.ie.